Dracula. You know, he's been in that many movies, you'd have thought somebody would have written a book about him by now. Oh, they did. Oh, hey folks! I'm Tom and welcome to Monster Gab, where we love to talk about classic and vintage horror. And today we're going to talk about a real classic Hammer horror film, Dracula, Prince of Darkness from 1966. So out of all of the Dracula films out there, even the ones outside of Hammer horror, why this film? Well, it's kind of a biased choice, I suppose. I mean, first of all, it's my favourite Hammer horror film of all. Not to mention, it's also the film that developed my love for classic horror films. In fact, if it wasn't for this film, this channel wouldn't even exist. It stars Christopher Lee as Dracula, of course, as well as Barbara Shelley, Francis Matthews, and Andrew Keir. So let me tell you how I discovered this movie then. So years back, many years ago, I was actually quite ignorant towards classic horror films. I only really had an interest for modern horror films. The idea of vampires or werewolves or mummies and witches didn't appeal to me. I thought the idea was pretty corny and cheesy and fairly unscary, and in a kind of way that's pretty true, but I was ignorant to the fact that these films could still potentially be quite entertaining. That was until one fateful night when I couldn't get to sleep. It was really late, I had work in the morning, and I decided, you know what, rather than stare at the ceiling, I'm going to put the television on and see what I could find. It just so happened that a channel was about to broadcast Dracula, Prince of Darkness, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'll probably fall asleep halfway through anyway, it might make me laugh, let's give it a go. What actually happened was I became immensely engrossed. I loved the storyline, I loved the set design, I just loved everything about it. In fact, I became addicted. And so my love for classic horror films began. Hey folks, just a quick update while I'm editing this review. I try to avoid spoilers as much as I can, but I've just realised that if you haven't seen the first Dracula film in the Hammer series, this does kind of give away a spoiler at the end of the first one. So I would advise that you watch that film first before you watch the rest of this review. Thanks very much. So here is the synopsis then. A group of 4 tourists decide to travel around the Carpathian Mountains, only for them to discover an abandoned castle. Despite differences of opinion, they decide to spend the night in the castle. The castle that once belonged to the late Count Dracula. The 4 tourists soon learn that their decision was quite fateful, as Count Dracula is now resurrected. And the resurrection of Count Dracula just means bad news for everybody, right? Especially those spending the night in his castle anyway. Right, let's talk about the movie then, and going back to my story and my ignorance of being introduced to this film, I had no idea that it was a sequel to a previous Dracula movie, but the movie itself gives you a recap, so you soon learn that you are indeed watching a sequel. The recap shows that Dracula was indeed killed by the brave Dr. Van Helsing, played by legendary Peter Cushing. This recap is kind of important, and throughout the rest of the film they really do want to remind you that Dracula is indeed dead. It's kind of important to the eeriness of the movie. Straight after this recap, the movie throws you right into a funeral, which is kind of a barbaric one at that. A young girl has passed away, and many men of the cloth have taken the decision to drive a stake through her heart. Because of the actions of the previous movie, the townsfolk and the villagers are immensely superstitious and believe that vampires are still a thing. This is where Father Sandor, played by Andrew Keir, comes along and completely stops the whole charade. The movie makes out that Father Sandor has travelled many a mile to stop this action, but also to educate people in this town that vampires are not something to be worried about anymore. He tells them to stop being superstitious and to carry on with their lives. And Father Sandor is kind of the Dr. Van Helsing of this movie too. However, straight after this fairly disturbing scene, we're thrown right into the middle of an oldly worldly tavern. I think this is partly where my love for classic films came in, because this tavern looks just so traditional. It definitely sets the tone for the fact that you're watching a period-based movie. It's only a small part of the film, but every time I see it, I just look at it and I think, God, I'd love to have a drink there, I really would. But everything about it looks great, the whole aesthetics, it looks quite real. There's a roaring fire there, all the characters are wearing the right attire, it just looks perfect and sets the tone for a period-based film. Even watching Father Sandor enter the tavern and ordering a glass of claret and asking if he can warm his backside on the fire, absolutely perfect. You completely forget you're watching a horror film at this point. But it's within this tavern that we find our 4 tourists, our main characters of the movie. They explain to Father Sandor that they are on their way to Carlsbad, and this is where Father Sandor kind of contradicts himself. After all, he's here telling all the townsfolk not to be superstitious, not to believe in any kind of vampirism, and yet as soon as he's told that these people are going to Carlsbad, he instantly warns them to stay away, especially from the castle, which isn't listed on any map. I absolutely love this, and again, this is another reason why I got drawn into this film, because it just added a huge amount of mystery to it. Naturally, in a film like this, our 4 tourists completely ignore any advice and head to Carlsbad anyway. However, they do start to approach the castle that Father Sandor warned them about. And it's at this point that the driver of the horse and carriage which has taken them refuses to take them any further. And as soon as they're kicked out of that carriage, another carriage comes to take them the rest of the way. Just so happens that this carriage doesn't have a driver, and despite their efforts, the horse and carriage inevitably takes them directly to the castle. This is a nice little reference to the original source material, because something similar happens in the novel too, and that's despite the fact that this film is actually a sequel. It's still nodding its head to the original novel. Something similar happens along the way in the movie too, when they introduce you to a character named Ludwig, who has very similar characteristics to that of Renfield, who is in the original novel. So now at this point, our 4 tourists are at the entrance of the castle, and they soon discover that there is no one here, it's completely derelict, but it almost feels like they were expected. There are 4 places laid out for them on the dining table, and their bedrooms have been prepared too, including their luggage set out in the rooms. Again, more mystery is added to this movie, and another reason why I love it so much. We know we're watching a horror movie, but we haven't seen any element of horror yet, just mystery, which really draws you in. For a good period of this time, we don't see a single servant or any kind of member of staff or host to this castle. All we are getting, as an audience, is more and more mystery and more intrigue. Eventually we do see a servant named Clove, and he is the typical kind of, I don't know how to explain it, he kind of reminds me of Lurch from the Addams Family, really gaunt and really ghostly, perfect for the role. And the fact that this castle is just so big and empty gives it a kind of haunted feeling. You know, the thought that Dracula is dead at this point kind of gives the film a bit of a ghostliness. It's by no means a ghost story, but you do kind of get this sense of paranormalness at this point. Now, like I said earlier, Dracula is indeed dead, but it's a Dracula movie, so I don't think it's a spoiler to say that at some point we expect him to be resurrected. It would be a spoiler, however, to tell you how he gets resurrected, which is why I won't. I will say, however, that for its time, it is pretty gory and graphic, and if anything, quite sinister too. And again, for its time, it's done pretty well, but you'll have to watch it to see what happens. So eventually we get to see Christopher Lee playing the iconic role of Dracula, which is quite interesting because Christopher Lee played Dracula many a time for Hammer, but in this particular movie he's barely in it, and he has no lines or dialogue whatsoever. Now, from what I've read, Christopher Lee refused to read any of the lines that were written for him because he thought the dialogue was absolutely terrible. But then I've also read that Jimmy Sangster, who was the screenwriter for the movie, didn't write him any dialogue. Which of those stories is true, I couldn't tell you, but the fact is, Christopher Lee does not talk in this film at all. Despite that though, he still steals the show. I mean, he is Dracula of course, but his performance is still immensely powerful. With the stern looks on his face, the snarls, the growls, the hissing, and just the posture of the man, he really does give a great performance. Which is why Christopher Lee is considered one of the best Draculas. But hey, we're all open to opinions here. Let me know in the comment section, you know how it works. The musical score in the movie is the typical kind of orchestral music that you expect in horror films of its time, but it's still fairly effective. In fact, there are many times when it's not even there, but when it does come in, it's got some very heavy, kind of bassy brass sound to it, which really just kind of goes with the terror of the movie. The characters in this movie are particularly quite interesting, especially our 4 tourists, but my favourite has to be Barbara Shelley, who plays the part of Helen. Now, many people may watch this film and feel that Helen is just the typical damsel in distress. She's constantly screaming, she's frightened of everything and just wants to leave. But for me, she's the voice of reason. I find that Barbara Shelley really does play her character well, because I do get the sense of fear out of her, and I also sympathise with her character also. I mean, I particularly wouldn't want to stay in a castle like that either, and I really do feel her frustration when the rest of the group really do just kind of put her down and tell her she's being ridiculous and that everything's going to be alright. It's almost like she doesn't have an opinion, and the fact that she's immensely frightened doesn't give her a voice. It's really frustrating, and I really do feel it. I also love how naive the characters are in this film as well. I mean, apart from Helen, they all seem to feel that it's okay to go along with everything that's happening. And then when it does eventually come to dealing with a vampire, they're completely unaware, unprepared, and unarmed. They have to discover the knowledge themselves. And just to add a little more trivia to this review, Eddie Powell was the stuntman for Christopher Lee in this movie, and it's reported that he almost died. I can't tell you exactly how, because that would kind of give away a spoiler for the movie, but you'll have to check it out for yourself. Apparently it was almost pretty fatal. So let's talk about the pros and the cons of this movie then. Well, first of all, the pros are that this film looks absolutely brilliant, especially with its set design. It's one of the reasons that I fell in love with the movie and developed a love for classic movies, but despite the age of this film, it just looks great anyway. It is a period-based movie. It's set in 1895, and it really does make you feel like you are transported back in time. Another big pro for the movie is the mystery at the beginning of it. In fact, a big chunk of this movie is a mystery film. The horror doesn't actually kick in till much later, but what it does do is, as an audience member, you feel immensely intrigued and you want to know what's going on. And then when the horror does kick in, it just becomes a perfect movie. I would also say it has very good, strong characters, and the acting is top-notch, especially that of Barbara Shelley and Andrew Keir. And not that I think this film has any major cons, but if I have to list any, I would probably say the colour of the blood. It's too bright red for me. Now, we all know that blood is kind of like a dark crimson red colour, but films back in the day used this kind of like bright red look. I think it kind of added to the shock value, especially as films were just beginning to film in colour anyway. It was kind of their way of showing off, but for me it's just a bit fake. I suppose another con that I could list is the fact that this film has a very low death count. Now, I don't feel that films should rely on a high death count to be any good, but a couple more fatalities could have, been put in here somewhere or another. Maybe a couple more vampire bites or something, And the other con is the fact that Christopher Lee has absolutely no lines in the film. Not that he needs any, he still plays the part really, really well and steals the show, but he has such a great, deep, boomy voice which suits his character so much. And of course he does use it in other Dracula movies, but a couple of lines here would have been really, really good. But honestly, it doesn't spoil the movie for me, and I do highly recommend this one. In fact, I recommend all of the Dracula films from the Hammer franchise. So if I'm going to rate this film out of 10, you may think it's biased, but I'm going to give it a strong 8 out of 10, and I really do believe that it deserves it. I really do think it's a great movie and shouldn't be missed. So guys, what do you make of my review? Do you think I've missed out any major important points? Let me know in the comments section. Have you seen this film? Is it your favourite in the franchise? What is your favourite Dracula movie? Please do talk to me, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts. Please be sure to subscribe, folks, as I post a new video every, well, I don't know, whenever I can film one. I'm in full-time work. Maybe if enough of you subscribed, I could quit my job and do this full-time, and then I could give you a regular schedule. How about that? It's not all on me, So hey, why don't you help out and do your bit? Share this with your friends, click the notification bell, click the like button, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe. Oh, and by the way, I don't know who they are, but if you don't subscribe, they will get you. Now if you excuse me, I've got some business to take care of.